Okay. Hi, my name is Maggie Bornstein, and I'm a former Ford Montana intern here in Missoula. We're here with Grant Kier, a Democratic candidate for the 2018 congressional campaign. We'll be conducting these interviews with each House candidate for the 2018 primaries who has agreed to participate. Each candidate will be asked the same set of questions surrounding issues that matter to young Montanans. Grant, are you ready to get started?
I'm ready, Maggie, and thank you for having me.
Of course. So, our first question is many of our staff and volunteers are LGBTQ and trans. Do you support the expansion of Title IX of Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation and gender expression as protected classes? Why or why not?
I do support the expansion, and the reason for me is pretty simple. I think this is a fundamental right that everybody has to feel comfortable in their own bodies and to be loved and love whomever they choose and whoever feels right for them. And I think it's a fundamental component of who we are as Americans to protect that for everyone. So I would absolutely support that.
So, our second question is high schoolers and college students across the state have been organizing marches and walkouts on their campuses. Do you support closing loopholes in federal law that allow the sale of firearms without a background check, including gun shows and online purchases? Why or why not?
I do support closing loopholes in our background check system. I think for people, it's really intuitive that when we say we have a background check system, that everybody is being checked under all circumstances when they're trying to purchase firearms. So I think it's natural that we do that. And I think that we can go further right now on understanding gun violence as well and really invest through CDC research and understand what's contributing to gun violence in our countries and how we can start to address it more effectively.
So, our third question is what is your stance on a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are brought to the United States, also known as dreamers?
I think, can any of you, I certainly can't remember where I was born or the circumstances under which that I was born. And I think for so many of us, we grow up in a place, and that place really defines who we are as a person. These young people were brought to this country by their parents. Some of them had no idea that they weren't even born here. They're now serving in our military. They're helping us by working really hard in our communities. They're students, they're doctors. I absolutely support a pathway to citizenship to take care of these people and make sure that those people who feel Americans and are contributing to America have an opportunity to be Americans legally.
So, our next question is Montanans love public lands, and many of our peers hope to pass along our wilderness areas to our kids, just like our parents did for us. How do you feel about opening more public areas of lands to oil and gas drillings?
So I am really proud that my background has actually been about protecting and even creating public lands. I can't think of anything more important than passing our public lands on to the next generation. I think that we have already very clearly designated places where it is acceptable and appropriate to be extracting natural resources. We do not need to be opening up additional places. Even those places that are open now are not all being leased. So I think it's really important that we protect natural lands. I think that includes the Wilderness Study Acts that are being proposed by our current congressman. And I'd like to see those change so that they really reflect the kinds of protections that Montanans want. And I also think that's really important in looking at the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act. That's something that I would absolutely work tirelessly to try to get passed through Congress.
So, our next question is a little bit lighter. So, could you tell us two truths and a lie about yourself? And then I'll guess the lie.
Okay, well, this is a hard one. So I got into this race because I don't like politicians lying. So as long as we're going to set the record straight here. So I'll start with my wife and I actually met on the top of a mountain, and we were stuck in a tent together for 3 weeks. At the end of those 3 weeks, she proposed to me. The other is that when I moved to Montana, I started to race mountain bikes pretty seriously. Ended up winning a mountain bike national championship, and was really proud to have done that while I was also working to protect conservation lands. And the last one is, let's see, one of the things I'm most proud of having done was climbing Mount Everest on my 30th birthday to make sure that I could kind of close out my youth and feel like I was moving into this new phase of my life with a really clear transition.
Okay, this is really hard. So, I'm laughing. I'm going to say the lie is Everest.
The lie is Everest.
Okay.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, you're really cool now. So other than that, so our sixth question is, what is your stance on a federal minimum wage of $15, and why do you feel that way?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for people to understand. We all know that wealth disparities have increased to unprecedented levels in our country. And that isn't just happening with the wealthiest 1%, it's happening geographically in our country. So wealth is being consolidated into specific parts of our country. I absolutely think that there are places in our country where $15 minimum wage won't actually let somebody have a living wage. And there are places like really small towns in rural Montana where a $15 minimum wage would put a mom and pop shop out of business at a community diner. So I'm not in favor right now of a $15 minimum wage across the country because I don't think that makes sense. But I do think we have the technology and the resources and ability right now to focus on how to create a living wage based on community costs of living, and also to hold bigger corporations, McDonald's and Walmart and those corporations who have many more employees to a standard of $15 minimum wage or even higher, so that those big corporations that can absorb it are really taking good care of their workers, but the mom and pop shop in a small town in rural Montana isn't driven out of business overnight.
Sure. So our next question is, as of 2017, there were 5,952 Montana students enrolled in 25 TRIO programs across the state. Do you support allocating federal funding for TRIO, which offers support to marginalized students and enrolled in post-secondary education?
Absolutely. In fact, I was talking to a student at MSU who had been involved in this program and talked about how important those support structures work. I think it's really imperative that we continue to have funding from the federal government through the Department of Education for TRIO, and that we provide a really good safety net and sense of support for people who are really feeling like moving into college is a huge opportunity, but a really big shift in culture for them if it's their first time, if they're the first generation to be going to college, or they don't feel like they have a lot of members in their community surrounding them. I think it's really important.
So our next question is, do you support providing free college tuition for two-year community college programs? If not, what are your thoughts on addressing the rising cost of college tuitions and student loans?
Well, I guess I would say I do support that for two-year colleges. I think it's really important, especially now. I've seen in my work in Montana through economic development that these two-year colleges have an incredible ability to adapt to community needs and provide real training for what's needed in the workforce quickly. I think that's a huge opportunity that everyone should have an opportunity to have post-high school education. And in addition to that, I also think we need to work on four-year college funding. And one of the big challenges is that we've seen a shift in our lifetime, where when I was growing up and I was in college, our states were paying about 70 to 75% of the cost of tuition. And students were only asked to pay about 10 or 15% while the federal government kicked in some. And we've seen that really reversed. So students are asked to bear an unreasonable burden to pay tuition, and states are really not pulling their weight. So I would, in Congress, advocate for a program where we put more money in from the federal programs, but we do that with an incentive to states. So if they invest more, the federal government invests more. And states that aren't investing are penalized from the federal government, so that we really encourage states to get back in the practice of supporting higher education.
Thank you so much. So that was our last question, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I would just like to say thanks to you, and thanks all of you for taking the time to come out and watch tonight, or whenever it is you get a chance to look at this. It's really important that young people are engaged. This is an important election. I hope you'll pay attention. I would love an opportunity to earn your vote in this primary and again in the general election in November. So thank you so much for participating, and you can follow us on Facebook or kierforcongress.com.
Sweet. Thank you again.